Ladies and gents, this is the Frugal AI podcast, and today I've got Sarah with me. Sarah, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm well. Thank you for joining and thank you for your support. So we were all last on a podcast in July when there was a hackathon event at Cambridge University. We're expanding the series to capture the opinions of others and team participants and so on and so forth. So it's only right that you should introduce yourself, please. I know you work with Elizabeth and all the gang at the Frugal AI Hub. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Indeed. Hi. So my name is Sarah Greasley. I've worked in technology for probably 40 years now. Well, more than 40 years actually. So I was a distinguished engineer at IBM for many years, specialising in working with financial services organisations, and then I spent 5 years as CTO at Direct Line. And most recently, I spent 2 years at Amazon Web Services, where I was leading solution architects across Europe, so leading the people who work with customers across Europe and helping them to get value out of their engagement with AWS, which, as you know, is one of the largest cloud providers. So so I stopped doing that about a year ago, and since then I've been working with Elizabeth, who was once one of my customers, and working with Elizabeth and the team at Cambridge to, as part of her Frugal AI Advisory Council, so helping to support her and the team as they focus on the Frugal AI initiative, how we really, and for me, it's something I'm very passionate about, which is how do you get value out of AI, but at the same time, there's a huge concern about the environmental impact of AI, and how do you balance those two different imperatives?
Tell us more, Sarah. I was going to push you on this one. So you're really, really passionate about this. So you've got involved in this, aside from that you know them, and Elizabeth was a customer. Prior, you were at Amazon, and you would have had to consume tremendous resources in your division to deliver those services to customers. What was like a tipping point for you to sort of start to get involved in this, or what thing can you think of saying that made you really begin to think I should focus on this?
So when ChatGPT kind of leapt into public consciousness, which probably is 18 months ago now, then I think we all understood that this technology has huge potential impact, right, on companies, all different types of companies and organizations, right, and different jobs, whether you are a Hollywood screenwriter, or whether you are a PA, or certainly we've seen huge, all insurance, which is clearly my bailiwick. But so we've seen, or we knew very quickly that this had potential to have huge impact, right? But at the same time, we could see that it would mean increased requirements in terms of data centers, in terms of technology to support it. It can be very resource intensive, and I think part of why I think this initiative is so important is that I think we need to be mindful about how we use AI, right? So I get that videos of cats surfing on ironing boards is fine, right? But actually, I think we can do a lot to actually use AI more effectively because we only have limited resources, and AI is using a significant, or has the potential to use a significant amount of those resources.
Sarah, cats on surfboards. Have you hacked into my ChatGPT account? Did not, or have I shared this with you? Anyway, so let's go on to your role with Elizabeth. So you said you're taking an advisory position, supporting them and working with them. What kind of it are you bringing? What things are you discussing with them, sort of day to day? What's your role there?
So I think what am I bringing? I'm bringing my expertise and my experience, right? So which is based on, I guess, two things. One is, the fact that I've worked in technology for so many years, but also an understanding across lots of different customers that one of the things that customers worry about, what are the things that technology firms worry about, and how do we, and yeah, I guess that, and helping to provide a sounding board for the team, right? Because they're doing some amazing stuff, but I provide some of that link into the corporate world. Not that I'm actually in the corporate world anymore, but understanding the corporate world, and as I say, a sounding board for much of their thinking as they think about where do we need to focus, where are some of the challenges, and how do we raise awareness around Frugal AI.
Got it. So you're giving the big business context. So when they're thinking of innovations and all these great ideas, you're able to look at that and say, well, hang on, I was in a big corporate that was in this space, and this would or would not work because of these reasons, and help them with things like this.
Yeah, I think there's, and I think there's, what we have seen quite a lot of is a lot of proof of concepts, and actually how do you then, and actually translating that into real value and real applications and scaling it can be quite challenging, and so I think it's actually bringing that awareness and understanding into the discussion as well.
Well, let's roll into the awareness. And just a moment ago, I used the word context, so we can set up this topic and use the words resource intensive as the AI is, right? Could you define those two things? So if folk are wandering through and watching this video, what are the resources being consumed? Can you define all those for us, and then explain this intensive element? So like, what's happening that's making the consumption so high? So let's start with the definitions of those things before we dive into the detail.
So what are the resources? So the resources that I talk about really fall into, I think there are four main things for me, right? One is power. So data centers consume power, right? Even today, I think 20% of the power that's generated in Ireland is used to power data centers. There are predictions that I've had many predictions that that 15% of the power being generated in the US will be used to power data centers. Data centers are becoming more dependent on water. So water is a resource, right? And that water is used for cooling very often. So power, water, resources in terms of the chips, right? So and the elements and metals that go into those chips, right? And I guess the other thing that I think about in terms of resources is things like that infrastructure. So connectivity, right? Whether it's connectivity into the grid, or whether it's fiber into the data center. So that connectivity and therefore latency associated with AI or with applications. So those are the resources that I think about. There are other resources you also need to think about, like data, but I think those are these are the raw data resources that we think about.
Then on to the intensive part. I think you hinted at it a few times there, but let's go into what, for anyone again wandering across this, what is AI doing that's causing such heavy consumption? What's the kind of architecture here? Can you go into a bit of your tech side as to what does it take to do this?
I'm sure people have heard about large language models. Those models have to be trained, right? They have to be, you have to build, and those models are becoming very, very, very large. So we're talking, 50 billion items in those models. So they become very large. They have to be trained. That training can take a very long time. Those models have to be trained so that they can do certain tasks, right? And that they can do those certain tasks with a level of accuracy, right? So that you don't, so that when you ask a question, you get a good answer, right? Rather than gobbledygook or whatever. So I mean, that doesn't mean, so accuracy is an interesting discussion around the whole thing about accuracy is a separate discussion. So training the models, creating the guardrails within which the models operate is a very intensive and increasingly automated. So you get AI to train your AI, and you know, so identify the questions that you can answer, questions you can't answer, the biases, sometimes the biases, understanding the biases in the data, because, you know, particularly if you are training on the internet, you're getting lots of different types of data from lots of different places, some of which is accurate, some of which is not so accurate, some of which is, you know, actually downright wrong. So the whole training can be very, is A, time intensive, but is B is also compute intensive. Okay, and that is why you see today people, you know, kind of scraping data from lots and lots of different places, right? So if you think about some of the AI models that provide text to voice, right? They, you know, that you have to train it so that it comes across as a normal, you know, I'm not an avatar. Oh, well, I may be an avatar, you don't know, do you? Sorry, as you do, because you can count my fingers. It's about training. So that's in itself is intensive, okay? And the larger your model, the more intensive and the more longer that training can take. And particularly as you start to, going back to our cats on surfboards, actually, the more you get into video, you know, again, that also requires quite a lot of training, and so that you're you know, you have the you know, it can generate, right? And there's stuff coming up every day, which is really, it's getting better and better, the training, but it's still very resource intensive.
Yeah, we can dig in a bit more because you know, I'm into data sciences and love data sciences. So there's the kind of side of the data gathering and the acquisition of the data that powers it. And like a base, people can think of a base model is how I think of it. So there's like training based on the data that you see.
Yeah.
And then there's this whole wave of curation that happens afterwards. So people may have heard of reinforcement learning is how it's structured. So like making sure that there's no extremism and other things present is this whole other layer. And I think the thing people might recognize watching this is, so I'm a ChatGPT user still because I started there. You occasionally get responses from the AI that says, well, do you prefer this one or this one? So there's a human loop now of like, which one was more valuable to you? This goes back into the whole learning process. And, you know, it looks helpful, but of course we're inputting to further consumption by giving our guidance.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So there's the building to the models. This is a big investment decision. As you say, it takes, I don't know what now, many months to even complete the training portion. And then when it comes to the serving of this model, so we're just all happy consumers. Ask a question, get a response, feels like magic. What's that side of it? Like, what does it take to do this?
What does it take to do this? So I guess if you really think about what happens, right, when you put a question in to a model, you know, first of all, that question is parsed, right? So translated into from input in our language, or in fact any language, but it's then parsed into something that so it's parsed into a set of computer instructions, right? That then generates effectively a load of parallel processing where it kind of tries to find the answers that may be right? So it kind of goes through the model, right? Identifies loads of different answers, and then it applies some probabilistic and those ethical and framework things to it, so that you end up with a most likely answer, typically a most likely answer, right? And it does that almost word by word, right? So this is why, and sometimes your prompt will be really, the prompt is the question, right? Sometimes that prompt will be very generic. So tell me about resilience in operational systems, right? Tell me about resilience. So that's like very, very broad. And what you tend to see is you get information coming back in a set format that someone's already set up as part of the training, and the information is just filled in, and it kind of gives you a high level summary. But actually, if you wanted something that was really specific, then you could drill down to say, tell me about resilience for, you know, critical national infrastructure, where there is an availability requirement of 100%, for example. You know, what do people do in that scenario? So you can kind of drill down and be very, very precise. And that's where prompt engineering, that I think we all know about prompt engineering because it's a new SEO, but prompt engineering is actually what helps you to become more specific about the information that you're looking, which clearly is of value to in terms of optimizing, but actually you then get a more detailed answer, because sometimes, as you probably know, with ChatGPT, you can get a real an answer which is full of buzzwords and actually doesn't mean very much. Whereas the more specific you can make the prompt, the more useful the information coming back from it is. And then we can add in, you know, as we start to take these, what I would call atomic tasks, and that you and I use as expert users, but actually we're seeing agentic, people talk about agentic AI, is where you kind of thread those tasks together to actually perform a process or do something or deliver an outcome.
So we're talking up the kind of increase presence of data centers, just more and more. So the data center itself is a problem, its energy consumption is a problem, it uses a lot of water, which is a problem, and you've got to plug that data center in and send output somewhere else. So all of this build is a large footprint for the Earth to have to suffer.
Huge.
My question is this one: all the growth of data centers, do you know, is this to support more training requirements so the AI brands can make it better and better? Or is it sort of, is it equally or more or less correlated with an expansion of users globally? So I'm trying to think of like, which one would be, if I had to push you on a driving force, what would you say?
So I think there are two things happening. Let me give you my perspective. There are two things happening. One is, so I saw a figure the other day that only 40% of people have actually tried ChatGPT, and that's in kind of the developed world, right? So I think that was a UK statistic, or maybe it's a US statistic, but basically 40% of people have tried ChatGPT. So there is demand, or sorry, there is an increasing demand. And at the same time, as you start to see AI becoming used at scale by a large number of customers, right? Then a large number of companies and a large number of industries, then you see the demand going up. Okay, so you know, for example, we have seen over the years, you know, more and more focus on automating call centers, right? And that will only continue because AI will take even more of those interactions and complete those without having to have a human in the loop, right? You may choose to have a human in the loop, but you may be able to do some of them without humans in the loop. Okay, so you've got this increase, but what I am now seeing and have started to see over the last 3 to 6 months is actually a focus by the tech companies on how they can do optimization, right? And this started, I think, with DeepSeek, because I think DeepSeek, which is a model which came out 6 months ago, I'm not actually sure what date that is. Whether it's, anyway, DeepSeek came out, and DeepSeek was a much smaller model, but it was delivering levels of accuracy that much larger models had. Okay. So at that point, you go, that's really interesting. How's that working? What are they doing to make that happen? Right. We're now seeing more. There's a wonderful phrase which is called a mixture of experts, right? Which is actually about which is a new way of taking a very large model, but only making a little bit of it active at any one time, right? So that rather than having this huge model sitting there, you've only got, so in actual fact, in this case, it's 32 billion as opposed to a trillion, right? So this is the Kimi K2 model. It's only activating a certain bit at any one time, and that drives down some of the resource requirements. The other thing that I think we're starting to see, and we've seen this happening for years, but it's now starting to happen with kind of other AIs, but actually it's now starting with Gen AI, is this focus on smaller large language models, right? So, and they tend to be focused on specific tasks. They're not quite so generalist. They're much more focused on specific tasks or specific industries, right? And they can be as accurate, but just as as accurate, but much smaller. Okay, so we're starting to see that optimization. And if you take it to its conclusion, right, and we see Apple starting to talk about LLMs that sit on the phone, right, and sit on the phone, and they are operating on your data, which is on the phone potentially, that becomes almost one of the ultimate optimization techniques, is to use a lot of this technology that we all have sitting around us that is not well utilized in order to enable us to actually offload stuff from some of the data centers. And Apple are talking about actually being able to go out to the cloud when they need to, but actually a lot of the time sitting their LLM will sit on the phone or laptop.
Yeah, I mean,
probably laptop rather than phone.
This offloads some of the energy resources from their Amazon bill onto my phone, my electricity of my home, doesn't it? Keeping my phone fully juiced. But tell us more then. So I see that kind of access is expands into, I don't know, tech on the phone. I'm being cynical.
Yeah.
It moves the responsibility of the energy consumption to the home user instead of the cloud and these sorts of things. But
yeah,
well, I don't know. Pick me up on this. Are they genuinely looking at this from a consumption standpoint? Is that sort of high on their agendas as far as you're concerned?
So I can't speak for Apple, and I don't know what Apple are doing. But what I will tell you is that I think all of the cloud providers certainly are, have an ambition to get to net zero, right? And they do have an ambition, for example, to use renewable energy. So I think all of those large organizations are aware of some of the challenges associated with that, right? I'm not close to how they're working, where they are. So I can't give you a view that says, this is where we are today, but I can certainly tell you all of them have, are very aware of some of those challenges, and how that gets delivered is something they're thinking about as well. And this is why you see today optimization becoming a much more important thing than it was probably 12 months ago.
Okay, so I understand the smaller models with more focused use cases is one way to just reduce the overall consumption. I think I recognize this as I'm a coder, so you can use models that are good for coding, and then some are good for reasoning, some are good for something else.
Yes.
So I recognize this piece. Sarah, what can regular folk do that are just like, don't think, don't really care about the specifics? What can folk think about doing to reduce their consumption?
So that's a really good question. I think I would say people can be, I think the best thing people can do is actually be a lot more specific about what they're asking, right? So, yes, so let me give you a good example, right? So, a friend of mine basically asked their AI to book them tickets, right, for a weekend in Paris, right? Which I think was quite brave to start with, quite brave.
Yeah.
So, and but they weren't specific enough, right? So it booked like the first Eurostar out, right? Which was 6 o'clock in the morning, which meant you had to get up at 4. Was like almost would ruin your whole weekend because you have to get up so early, right? But so actually, and then so they had to rerun the query because what they should have said is, I want to be able to have breakfast in London and then catch the Eurostar. But being the more specific you can be about your requirements and what you want, then then the fewer iterations you will have of a discussion with a AI, right? And the better the response will be, I think. So prompt engineering, right? I think the other thing I would tell you is to your point, understanding what AI is really good at helping you with, right? If you ask AI to do something that might actually be a Google search rather than, AI, why would you do that, right? So if you want to know where a restaurant is, I have seen people use AI to find out where the restaurant is. And you go, okay, that's fine. But actually, do you need to use AI for that? So I guess that's the other side of it. The way that I appreciate that certainly when you look at Google Maps, there's AI sitting underneath that helps you to work out the optimum route and all that sort of stuff. So I'm not saying it doesn't allow you to use AI, but actually, if I need to know the postcode, do I need to do an AI? Do I need to do an AI question? No, I can probably do a Google search, something like that.
No, I love it, Sarah. So it was only Elizabeth telling me before on another video. Google search is reputed to be about 10% of the cost. So if you want to know how to boil an egg or what the time is in Argentina, like this is Google search is perfectly adequate for this. And then I guess the rest of it, like you're saying, is for people that are coming into this thinking about consumption. What was prompt engineering has become this area, this art of how to query a language model in natural language, I suppose. This is just a good one to practice. So you'd avoid the repetition, is your point here, of like if you're too general to start, you have to keep asking, which is just you're doing it over and over again. And then I suppose the ideas of it's quite hard for people to think of space in terms of data. So like I always think that language models are really this feature space where all these words are interconnected. And it's quite hard for people to think of this, but it's sometimes when I think of darts into a dartboard. So like sometimes the way you're prompting here is to get your specific answer. Like you need to be able to say, I don't know what, I am in cybersecurity and I need to know this. Kind of just helping the model overall zoom in rather than search everything. But of course, increasing the chances of not having to repeat yourself and have this long interaction with the AI to try and figure out what is it that I need to know. Anyway, so I don't know how the whole world learns about prompt engineering. Perhaps they just need to be on LinkedIn for 2 minutes, and there's enough guides on there, I think.
Yes, I know. And what we're seeing is those prompts. They can become much longer, right? We're seeing new models have prompts that are also much longer, and I think that's also helpful, right? So because that allows you to be more specific.
Okay, Sarah. So we've done the problems here, the consumptions and sort of implications of it, and just the sheer scale of it. You've explained that the AI companies are concerned about it. In terms of regular users, they can just increase their knowledge before they dive in and perhaps optimize themselves. And in the meantime, some of the smaller large language model capability might come through. Let's get into a forecast, please. You've got a crystal ball on your desk somewhere there. Like, what is this going to look like over the next 2-3 years? So the whole kind of consumption, data centers, and all the all the parties within. Like, what do you think is going to happen? Take it on two sides. What do you think is going to happen that's quite obvious? And is there anything that you know or can think of that people might not expect?
I think there will be a big focus on optimization, right? Whether that is optimization of optimization models, whether that's optimization of processes, optimization of training, so more AI training, AI, and I know that increases it, but actually it will decrease the time, I think. So I think open source, more and more open source on the models. I think more targeted models, right? So a good example is medical imaging, right? That's going to become really there'll be models that are very, very focused on that. Well, there already are models that are very focused on that. So all of those, I think, are kind of obvious. I would like to think, if I had a crystal ball and I could direct that crystal ball, right, I think there are two things that in my mind, right, I think we should be using AI to find some of the solutions, right, to some of these problems. So I do think that there is a danger that we're sitting here saying that AI is the enemy of sustainability. It's not, right? It's AI can also help us to be more sustainable, in my view, because I think it can do a lot of things. So, for example, it can lower the costs associated with building roads, right? Because it allows you to create materials that are more in sync with the environment that road is being built in, for example, right? So you can use AI, for example, to get better at spotting forest fires, right? Or spotting fires, heathland fires, so based on satellite images. So actually, can you therefore stop some of this horrendous forest fires that we're seeing at the moment because of the temperatures, right? So there are, so if I'm looking at my crystal ball, right, I would like us to see us spending time and really, really thinking about how we can use AI to help to drive sustainability.
Sarah, thank you for taking us through all this. Here's your chance for a final word. Is there anything you want to offer on this topic that we didn't cover already, or any tips or insights for folks back home?
So I guess my immediate tip and insight, or my immediate tip is ask yourself, do you need to do it before you do it? Right? There's a school of thought that says that we are reasoning less because we are using AI to do more of our reasoning. So you kind of go, exercise your reasoning muscle, right? Exercise that, think about what you're trying to do. There is a danger with AI sometimes that you can stop thinking quite so much. So think about what you're trying to do before you turn to AI. So I always use AI, for example, as a something that helps me to draft it, and then I add sprinkle on the knowledge, the experience, the points that I particularly want to make, for example. So I think that's my hints and tips. I think my other insight is probably, I think the other thing we'll see, by the way, sorry, I'm having a little moment here. So I've gone back to my crystal ball here. I think we see AI already embedded in lots of things. We'll see it embedded in more and more things. right? And it will be, you won't, particularly as the models get smaller, they get more specific, they're sitting on devices, right? Then we will see AI. You just won't know it's there. It'll be under the covers, right? So that, I think, is the other thing. So it's beholden on all of us to actually think about the whole ethics and bias conversation. But that's a whole different
different video, Sarah, isn't it?
Different video, which takes us straight into the whole thing about, so context engineering apparently is the next big thing, or in terms of actually helping to make large language models that are more accurate, less biased, more ethically aligned. How can you but have ethics embedded in the model? So yeah.
Sarah, thanks for that. So I take it, so AI will become ubiquitous. It will just be there, and in the background, these things will all be getting made more optimized, more specific, so that AI can land on different devices and help us with different things.
Yeah.
Not to forget the question of, should I, just because I can, should I? This type of feedback. Yeah. Good. Well, Sarah, look, thank you for taking us through all this today and participating, and thanks for all your insights, ladies and gents. This was the Frugal AI podcast.